All right, I'm hoping that this recording it's a little confusing. I know that the AI is taking notes for us, I trust that it's going. Happy New Year, everybody! Welcome to the first meeting of the PRC for 2025. It's nice to see everybody here. We have I have one regret, and that's from Howard, but he does pass along his best wishes for the season to everybody. And hopefully he returns the next time we return. I don't have any other regrets at this point. It's nice to see. Where's Peter's back? So hey, Peter.
Hey,
There you go. Okay, first item of business is to approve the agenda as circulated. So can I have a motion to approve? Matthew, seconder. Andrea, thank you very much. All in favor? Approved. Thanks very much. The minutes I've sent everybody together with the YouTube video of the last meeting, the synopsis that the AI generated. Any questions or concerns about how it's doing in that regard? Is it sufficient for our purposes, you think?
Well, I'm not, as you know, a big fan of AI, but I think I would say adequate.
Yeah, I would think so too. It does the job, and as we mentioned earlier, if anybody has any questions about what actually takes place in the meeting, everybody has an actual YouTube of the meeting itself, so that kind of makes things easier. I've lost my picture now. Sorry, guys. Hang on a sec. Uh, Oh, there we go. Sorry about that, guys. Okay, yeah. I think we'll leave it as it is and keep on going. News and announcement. Clearly, the most significant piece of news is the prorogation of Parliament, which has a big impact on what we do, because clearly we now no longer have any committee work to look at and or bills to consider. Theoretically, the bills die on the order paper. However, they can be reinvigorated or reenacted in bill form if the next session of Parliament it agrees to that. I doubt that will happen. I think it's pretty much common knowledge, or it's certainly accepted that within a very short period of time after March 24th, when the prorogation ends, there'll be an election called, and then which means there's not going to be any legislative business in any event, and then a new government. I think it's fairly safe to say that the Conservatives it's theirs to lose. The spread between them and whoever is next, I'm not even sure the Liberals are next anymore, is so significant that with the Conservative government coming into power, I would highly think that the reenactment of our existing bills would not be something that would happen. Anybody have any comments? Yep, sure. Matthew, go for
Well, and this is a comment. I'd like Irving to chime in on this. Oh, he doesn't want to. Uh,
it.
it looks like, correct me if I'm wrong, that Polyev and the Conservatives are going to be running on a law and order plank, or several law and order planks, which means that if the Conservatives get in power with a majority, they're going to be putting forth a slew of government bills that are, in criminal justice, that are of the lock 'em up variety.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so I would really think, and I mean, I was on the PRC for the last couple of years of Harper's reign, and it was busy. And I think it'll be busy with Polyev as well. It's going to be a tough on crime agenda. We're going to see lots of mandatory minimum sentences, which the Supreme Court has basically trashed for the most part, but they don't care. There's going to be all kinds of law and order,
Well,
tough on crime stuff that I would think is going to generate a fair bit of activity by us.
well,
Uh,
Miles, that raises a question.
sure.
One for Irving, of course, who's a lot more political than I am, which is we receive a grant from Public Safety Canada. We have historically, going way back to my early days in the 1990s when it was called the Solicitor General of Canada. What is our risk, Irving? This association has historically, way back to 1919, often opposed capital punishment and right-wing legislation. What's our exposure if we do that in parliamentary committees from the Polyev administration?
Are you asking me, Matthew, about the grant, or you asked me about capital punishment?
No, I'm asking you about the continuing grant, given our profile of criticizing a lot of bills that the conservatives are likely to put forward.
I shouldn't be commenting on hypotheticals, but I think I don't think there'll be a distinction necessarily between ourselves and any of our sister agencies, if you like. If they were to cut funding to criminal justice agencies, I don't think we would be any different from anybody else. But I couldn't possibly comment on what they may or may not do. I got an email the other day saying they're going to continue us for a year. And frankly, I kind of question how they're able to do that in the current situation. Because historically, and maybe Richard can comment, I don't know if your experience with the Treasury Board and whatnot, there is a government in place. I don't think they're in a position to authorize new expenditures for April the 1st. So I don't know how it is. They told me you'll probably get it for April the 1st, right? And then you get into a situation during an election, which convention has it as well, that there's no legislation, obviously, during an election campaign, and there's certainly no expenditures. So I'm kind of doubtful about the veracity of the email that I got, quite frankly. But, hopefully we will get our funding starting April again. In the current climate, you're not going to have a new government on April the 1st, obviously. Richard, I don't know if you have any more intelligence than I've offered here.
No, I don't have any special knowledge, but I certainly agree with what you said, Irving.
So we'll see. There was an article I was reading early this morning I can't remember if it was a Globe or the National Post or whichever, where apparently the headline seems to be that senior public servants are kind of opposing what PCO or the government is trying to push through in terms of new initiatives and stuff. Again, based on the same kind of convention that I referred to. So we'll have to wait and see. And, I wouldn't go out and buy a new car right now.
Thank
Well,
you.
I refer to it differently as, are you saying that I shouldn't do anything because we're going to go on a building spree for federal penitentiaries?
I didn't say that. I don't think they need more space. So I wouldn't be buying concrete, no.
You are a very benevolent observer.
Whatever I can offer, Matthew. We'll have to wait and see. Look, it's a really, I spent 35 years in government. I don't quite remember a situation quite like this either, where you have kind of a government in place, and we could go like 5-6 months without having real clarity on the situation, right? And things go on. Obviously, public servants will get paid. Obviously, old age security pensions will go out. That's not new. That's part of the fiscal framework, as they call it. But when there aren't contracts in place already, I'm doubtful that they're in a position to authorize new ones.
So therefore, if we don't get funding on the 1st of April, what happens to us, Irving?
Well, we're going to call each of our members of the PRC for a donation.
Oh, a cash demand.
Yeah, Matthew, get your checkbook ready. Listen, seriously, we're not in a dire situation by any means. We could carry on for a fair bit of time, but obviously, I'm hoping that the information that I received is accurate, and that we will get funding. Now, long term, that's a totally different issue. Going beyond the April year, the year that starts April the 1st, it's totally different based on kind of the speculation that you were referring to. They may presumably a conservative government will have a different kind of agenda than the current government, although I don't want to say think political. I'm not quite sure what the agenda is of the current government right now. But there's a huge deficit in the country, and there's a phenomenal debt. So somebody has to deal with it at some point in time. What the implications of that are, we'll have to wait and see.
Thank you, Irving.
Yeah, okay, and that's a good segue into what was Bill C-40, now the Miscarriage of Justice Review Act. So go ahead, Matthew. You can repeat your comments, and we'll take it from there on this piece of legislation, which is actually the last one that received royal assent before prorogation.
I'm just amazed, one, that it passed, and I think a heads up shout of praise is owed to you, Miles. I mean, this has been a long-standing issue for you, and I think you published on this issue, and you testified on this issue, and your testimony was really erudite, very impressive.
That's very, thank you, Matt. That's very kind of you to say. Yeah, it was a nail biter. It was the last meeting of the Senate, basically, where they gave it the third reading. Second last meeting of the Senate, they gave it third reading, and then it came back within a matter of days with royal assent. And the royal assent was read in the Senate 5 minutes before the very last meeting of the Senate, and then of course within a matter of days we had prorogation. So it's exciting to see that the bill's in place. But as a segue from our last conversation, and I was talking to a very well known scholar in this field who basically who is worried that there may be no funding for the commission. When the bill was introduced, Parliament was part of that enactment was to set aside 18 million a year for its operation, which will include I would think a fair amount of infrastructure, together with an appointment between 5 and 9 commissioners who will all be paid, depending whether they're full-time or part-time, somewhat along the lines of a Superior Court justice. So it's a pretty significant piece of payroll. But at this stage of the game, notwithstanding the fact that Minister of Justice Varani indicated he wanted to get it up and running quickly, there's been nothing done about it. Basically, there's been no call for people to apply to be commissioners on it, and certainly now there's no time for that to take place in any event, because while the original proposal was to have an independent group appoint the commissioners, which takes the political thing out of it, it's still in the hands of cabinet to make those appointments, and that's not going to happen, for the foreseeable future either. So it's interesting, and particularly because it is the law now. The former process under Section 696.1 of the Criminal Code, which was an application for a ministerial review, and the application form, it's online. You would go to what's called the Criminal Conviction Review Group, 4 or 5 lawyers in the Department of Justice who would take a look at it. That process has been eliminated, right? It's now the process under this new piece of legislation that's in place. But until the commission is actually active, the process would be now again still to this group in the Department of Justice, although the test for a miscarriage of justice is different than what it was under 696 of the Criminal Code. So it's interesting. So people who believe they've been wrongly convicted, who are seeking exoneration, can now make an application under the new legislation. But again, it goes back to the Department of Justice. I can tell you that one of the things that I've been doing with a couple other people in the background is we've created a new nonprofit federal incorporation called Miscarriage of Justice Canada. And the purpose of that, it's complementary now to Innocence Canada. So Innocence Canada, which is world renowned, it's been around for about 30 years. It only does homicides. So the new legislation isn't restricted to homicides. And so the Miscarriage of Justice Canada group And there's going to be a board of about 25 members. I'll be the executive director. The whole idea will be to basically handle those applications that are going to be generated that primarily are not homicide related, because that is Innocence Canada's purview. And also we will do homicide related cases if the person who is applying doesn't want to get on the wait list for Innocence Canada, which is now fairly considerable. So that'll be up and running this month. And then we'll do the public awareness outreach to penitentiaries and what have you to see who is interested in applying. And so we will vet and have carriage of applications to the Department of Justice under the new legislation. So there we go. Yes, Matthew.
I'm not as familiar with the legislation as you are, Miles. Are these commissioners order in council appointments?
They are now, yes. Yeah, the original proposal put forward by Justice Laforme and Westmoreland Terrari was to have an independent body make the appointments, but the legislation itself ignored that suggestion and left it with the cabinet. Yeah, and again, and that's another question too, is that hypothetically, if there is a conservative government in place, this is not a tough on crime piece of legislation. This is, and it's not soft on crime either. It's a very smart piece of legislation, but the appetite for a tough on crime government, under Poilievre, if that's what it ends up being, puts a few things in question. So, we will be operating Innocence Canada and Miscarriage of Justice Canada will both be operating, with under the legislation, but back to the group that's currently handling applications in the Department of Justice. So there we go. Yeah, so that's where that is. So thank you for the comments, Matthew. It's still pretty exciting. We're still going forward, but again, the funding for it and the appetite for it at the federal level, in the future, is up in the air to some degree. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes. If anything was going to be done by Varani, he should have done it at the beginning of January and what have you, but that didn't happen. So we'll wait and see. That's the only and as you can see from the agenda, that was the only bill that I kept on the agenda because it had advanced to royal assent since our last meeting. I haven't included any other bills because they no longer exist for our review. And likewise with the committee work, and even though Howard and Brendan are missing, we do have Rob and Dick here, but the committees are at an end as well. And they'll have to be reformed by whatever government's in place I presume they're going to be in place for a few days when Parliament comes back, in March. But the committee work won't go forward with a new election either. Any comment? Yes.
So the one bill, the conservative bill, which was a bill to restrict parole hearings for those convicted of homicide, that was a conservative sponsored bill. I think that's going to be very typical of what we're going to see under the Poilievre era. This is all hypothetical, Matthew, but I tend to agree. I was when I was in the thick of teaching and researching and writing, when Harper was in power, he was a gift, for those of us who do critical criminology. I mean, you could punch out an article every 3 months based on what he was doing and doing wrong, and with respect to criminal justice. And so I would always, kid my wife because I certainly didn't support Harper. But I mean, he was great for business, and he was great. He was great for the academic career, that's for sure. So anyway, I've certainly slowed down in that area these days, but I tend to think that when the Conservatives are back in power, it'll be the same kind of thing. It'll be a lot of fodder for review and publication. And I always remember when I actually inserted this in a couple of articles I wrote 10 years ago now.
Ian Brody, who was, chief of staff, or at least highly ranked in Harper's, uh, you know, apparatus. He had hit a quote that basically said that we really don't care about what lawyers have to say or judges have to say, or experts of any kind have to say. We get our mandate from the people. So that's the reasoning we put behind enacting legislation that we do. Right. So, and I always remember that because it was very true, and it took years to undo most of that damage that Harper did. But, here we go again. Maybe. That's again, hypothetically. So,
Mr. Chairman, is there going to be a report on the status of a police agency in Alberta?
well, it's back to Peter. Peter, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I do. Thank you.
Good.
Just happen to have that. But just as a quick aside from what's just been said, I think that in some respects we're giving Mr. Polyev a bit too much credit for actually thinking all this stuff through. That once he's no longer is able to just rant and rail about the Liberal government and the NDP, I'm yet to see some substance underneath that as to where things are actually going. I mean, you're quite correct, Miles, when you talk about, we don't have to worry about experts, etc. We'll do what the people want. The trouble is that, as was the case before, most of the people don't know what they want or even why they want it, other than being sheep led down the path. So I think that we do need to wait until the government comes in to actually see where it's going to be heading. Yes, it'll be to the right of center. That I think is quite obvious, if in fact he gets in, which he will. But that being the case, I would not want to just suppose that things will be. By the way, I did actually support Mr. Harper, so I have to be very careful what I say in this current company here. But I would be surprised that things that there's a game plan. Let's put it that way. I think it's still very much reactive to what looks good and getting the government out right now. So that's just my comment on that part of it. Regarding the Alberta Provincial Police, interesting. In a sort of a common speak, it's a dog's breakfast. It really and truly is. The initiative is still there to form an Alberta Provincial Police. The arguments against it, especially put forward by the RCMP union, is one of economics, saying, "Oh, it's going to cost you more and more and more." Well, that argument is slowly going out the window with the creation of the Grand Prairie Police Service, which is an independent municipal police agency in Alberta and duly authorized. And they're currently sharing jurisdiction with the RCMP, but will be taking over the jurisdiction of Grand Prairie in the next couple of years. And it's all being formed out. The people are quite happy with paying whatever it is that they need to pay, and it has been partially funded by government. And where they're getting a lot of their new employees, meaning police officers, is from existing police officers around the country. They're also offering a $25,000 relocation allowance, which is fairly sizable in this day and age, and housing's relatively cheap up there. The other thing is that the sheriffs, when I say a dog's breakfast, there's a lot of reaction or reactive thinking ever since Mr. Trump decided to do whatever he's alleged to be about to do. Our premier here has now just funded the sheriff's department, or the sheriffs, with $29 million for border security. Only because actually we have a very porous border in Alberta with America, and it's not patrolled by the RCMP to any real extent. So actually that makes sense if you want to look at it in those terms. An interesting development for the jurisdictional piece is that the government here wants to declare that first 2 kilometers north of the 49th as being critical infrastructure, which now gives authorization and authority to the sheriffs to be able to operate within that and all the full powers of arrest for that. So that's an interesting change that is coming about there. The other thing too is that hold on here, I'm just reading my notes that I had for this. Again, going back to the financial piece, that seems to be always coming up. However, as we've just noticed most recently out of Manitoba with the RCMP raise, and about 89 to 91% of all the policing costs are based on salaries, and benefits, etc. These smaller communities in Manitoba are now saying, "Hey, wait a second, let's take a look at this again." We also have the rise of the Saskatchewan Sheriff's Department, which is again a new thing, and that's becoming more and more like an actual police service as opposed to like a provincial police service. It could easily morph into that, similar to the way that Alberta is looking at potentially still morphing. They've actually enacted the legislation, provincial legislation, to allow it to occur, but it's really not going forward. There's numerous issues that aren't even being talked about. The transfer of assets, crime labs. I mean, if you truly want to operate a provincial police service or police force, you need all of that infrastructure in place. And then how does it transfer from Canada to the province? And that's still the contract between Canada and the province for provision of RCMP as provincial police is still there, and so that needs to be addressed. So there's a lot of talk at one level of what's going on, but when you get down and dig through the talk and into what is concretely being done, there's just a few points that are being done, such as this border piece, and also this is all tied into the government's pushback on harm reduction and safe injection sites, etc. Like it's all mixed into the pot, and it just, you pull out what morsel you wish to talk about on a given day, depending upon who is complaining the loudest. That would be my assessment of what's going on.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, Matthew.
Your mic.
Mike.
This is really extremely interesting, Peter. Thank you very much. Is CCJ going to be writing a brief on this provincial department or not? Or are we just monitoring?
I'll answer that. I was tasked with writing a brief. In fact, I had written one in a much longer one. It was part of a paper I did. And I was all set to go with that, brief it up, and have things done. At that point, the world changed. Everything got turned around. Danielle Smith came in after the NDP, and we moved to a whole different agenda here. And therefore, I have not finished doing the brief together, simply because it is so evolving that quite literally I'm literally monitoring it on an ongoing basis. And that's not because I want to get her the work.
Any other questions for Peter? Thank you very much, Peter. The other item we still have on the agenda, Matthew, we're going to go back to you, and our discussions about what you're going to prepare to submit to the government based on what the CCGA has done and its view, with respect to justice and what have you.
Well, let me promise to write a draft. It would be a letter to the Minister of Public Safety. I'm not sure how significant it will be received, but I will draft a letter for Irving's examination, and then we'll go from there. But quite frankly, I'm on this one. I'm very much a pessimist.
Well, I think Irving mentioned this at the last meeting. I think it's important for us to go on the record, no matter who receives it and how it's dealt with. It's important for us to at least make that effort and get out there. So
Will do.
Yeah, I appreciate that very much, Matthew. That'd be great. I have no other active matters to discuss. Anybody else have anything to offer? Yes.
Recruitment to the PRC.
Okay.
I would like to see younger people. We have 2 with us right now. I'd like to see that number double or triple. And I'm wondering, Miles, what we can do to move that forward.
Good question. It's not something I've dealt with before, but obviously it's a good point. Irving would have more experience with that than I would.
Well, Matthew, how many students have you got?
I had approximately 55 students in gangsters recently at Wilfrid Laurier. And I had, of that number, about 15% were A students.
I asked the question because in the past we used to get quite a sizable number of students. In fact, I think they were probably the largest proportion of PRC members back in the days when Michael Cole was the chair of the PRC. And I'm dating myself, but we're talking 15 to 20 years ago. But if you want younger people, I think that's where we need to be looking at. I think it takes more than just advertising. Obviously, we could send out emails and that sort of thing, but I think it's a personal contact that matters the most. So that's why I kind of pointed at you, Matthew. I mean, if you have contact with students, invite them, mention the PRC, and give them the coordinates to sit in on a session or two, see if they like it, and if they want to get involved, then that's probably the best way to do it.
Okay.
I can do that as well. I have a student editorial board that works for me in my capacity as the editor of the Wrongful Conviction Law Review. They're at what used to be Ryerson, now TMU. So I've got a dozen students there, and plus they have a fairly, it's the newest law school in Ontario. They have a fairly active criminal justice section that works independently of what I do with them. But yeah, I could reach out to those as well. So that's a good idea.
And going forward, if our speculation sees fruition in terms of criminal justice bills coming forth from presumably a new government, you could challenge students and give them maybe some course credits or whatever to get them deeply involved in writing some of the briefs, for example.
Yeah,
we've done that, and we've done it recently with a number of students, right? Getting involved at least. I don't know about the credit process, but that's just a suggestion.
Yeah, new young membership to prepare draft briefs for our review. That's an excellent idea. And we're going to need it. I really do think, as I've already said, I think there's going to be a fair bit of activity for us to monitor going forward. For whatever reason, and that's a good thing. We have
going to be good for PRC business. Right?
It is. I mean, the last brief that we actually submitted that was approved by the CCGA board was, I guess, on the spent conviction regime, which I presume will have its fifth iteration with Senator Pate in the next Parliament. So why not? Good idea. Thank you, Matthew. Any other ideas or thoughts?
Are we ready to adjourn?
Well, before we do that, and here's the question: is should the PRC prorogue until the return of Parliament? And again, I'd look to Irving for his guidance on this. We're not going to have any committee work. We're not going to have any legislation or bills till Parliament resumes on March 24th, and then there'd be a call for an election. And going forward, it's going to be a few months before there's actually going to be anything, at least legislatively or committee work to take a look at. Do we want to pause for a bit and wait till those things kind of kick back into gear, or and I'm certainly glad to do this, continue meeting and having a chat every month about current events, essentially, because that's all we're going to be able to discuss. I'm open to a suggestion. Yes,
I would suggest that, even if it's just we've been about 35 minutes today, even if it's only a short section, I don't think there's anything to be lost. Correct me, somebody, if I'm wrong. I believe committee work can continue during prorogation. Am I wrong on?
I think you are, Irving. I think committee work is done.
I thought they could continue, but I ask you to correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not certain about it or not.
If you have a question, then so do I. So that's a quick Google search. But anyway,
Yeah.
that's if it continues, then that's certainly worth discussing. Well, actually, Dick and Rob are here. And have you seen any? I mean, do you have anything to tell us with respect to your committees?
I don't. There has not been a meeting since our last meeting of the Human Rights Committee in the Senate, and they haven't issued any report. So no is the short answer.
And Rob?
My end, I'm not sure about the ability to meet during prorogation, but there was one meeting, and it was so I'll just cover that quickly. And last time Matthew had asked a couple of questions, which I followed up on. I'll follow up on today, and then there was a report. So I'll just quickly cover those three things, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
First was the meeting dealt with was the impact of President-elect Donald Trump's announced measures on border security and migration. So that was mainly discussions around involving the RCMP and CBSA. So they're covering topics like mainly people and drugs crossing the border illegally, fentanyl precursors to um, uh, concocting the more fancy drugs, that's type of stuff moving across the border, people moving across the border illegally. There's a lot of some discussion on using some of the money kind of tag for that in the future toward technology such as drones and helicopters patrolling the border. And also there was some discussion around, or no, I don't know, it was a direct discussion, but the discussion seemed to always focus on the CBSA being responsible for the points of entry, and the RCMP, police, et cetera, having a big role for the points in between. So that came up, sort of touched on last time. So that was not really directly relevant to our work here. So I'll stop right there and feel free to ask a question. But that's really what that was about, and I didn't see much of anything for here. As far as the follow up from last time, Matthew had asked if the CQ meeting on December 3rd had talked specifically, if there's any discussion specifically about Aboriginal policing in Quebec and alternatives to incarceration. And that was a meeting about the supplementary estimates. And I went through the brief kind of at the time of our meeting, I had gone through parts of the recording, but the written record wasn't available at that time. So I did review the written record when it came out, and there was nothing specific in there on those two issues. So that's the follow up for those two things. Now, of interest to us would be the report. The report was on fighting the phenomenon of vehicle thefts in Canada. So this is not about, just for clarity, for anybody who's not completely familiar with that topic, it's not about kids stealing cars and, because they don't have one so they can get home quicker. This is about organized crime, stealing vehicles, taking them to ports and exporting them. And it's very organized, and it's quite a thing in Ontario and Quebec. But it's and there've been some level of crackdown, but there were several recommendations came out in that report that are related to our work here. Two were two of them pertain to reviewing the Customs Act, a recommendation to review the Customs Act and to kind of enhance or strengthen the documentation required for items being shipped in containers mainly, and also the imposition of substantial penalties in the event of a false declaration of what's in the container, what's on the manifest. So you have a reference to substantial penalties there, and that's for the related to the Customs Act. There were two recommendations pertaining to prevention of crime targeting youth, and that was priority funding to a new project under the Youth Gang Prevention Fund, for anybody who's familiar with that. And as well, investing in the initiative to take action against gun and gang violence. So those two are targeting youth so that they can hopefully not get involved in this, because youth are being used by organized criminals to do some of this criminal work. So, and then on to another recommendation regarding penalties. So that was number 27. New offenses related to trafficking and exporting stolen vehicles. New criminal offenses related to auto theft involving the use of violence and links to organized crime. Adding a new aggravating factor at sentencing if an offender involved a young person in committing an offense. So another concern there about involving youth. And then increasing the criminal code penalties for motor vehicle theft, such as escalating terms of imprisonment for subsequent offenses. So what they're seeing in this world is repeat offenders. Penalties aren't severe. They get out or don't go in at all and get bailed out, and they go right back to doing the same thing. So there's a recommendation there on that. And speaking of getting out, committing a crime or being alleged to have committed a crime and then getting bailed, recommendation 28 recommends reviewing the bail system to reduce recidivism and deter auto theft. So not a specific idea there, but a reference to reviewing the bail system. So that's all I have. I can forward that report to Miles, and then perhaps it could be circulated if anybody's interested. And I'll kind of pick out or at least highlight in my email the recommendations, or refer to the recommendations. So anybody who does take a look can kind of quickly go to those ones I just discussed and take a look for themselves.
Yeah, Rob, great. Yeah, that's a great report. I'd be glad to receive that and circulate it. Matthew, had your hand up?
Rob, did the committee say anything about enhanced resources at the federal level for organized auto theft?
Enhanced resources. A lot of measures, a lot of tightening things up. I can go back and take a look and get back to you.
Okay, because my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that both provinces have provincial police departments that are in charge of this issue. Am I wrong?
Say that again?
Both the Quebec and Ontario have provincial police agencies that are seized with this issue.
Oh, I'm sure they. I can go back and look and see, but there's a lot of there has been activity on that, and I'd be extremely surprised to not go back and read exactly what you just said, that Quebec and Ontario have folks teamed and working. I think that's coming back to me. There's folks in other countries they're collaborating with. So there's folks in Canada definitely collaborating with others and internally to get on with this, make some progress in curtailing this issue, which is, by the way, spread out here to Atlantic Canada since the tightening of things, some obstacles being put up towards criminals in Quebec and Ontario through that work you're talking about there. So maybe I don't need to go back to it. I mean, but Quebec and Ontario had this first. It was quite prolific, and there has been some tightening. And I remember reading references to it moving outside or spreading across the country. So that's in part why the committee ended up looking at this issue this year and producing a report, which hopefully will churn out some results in the coming years, because it's clearly quite a problem in Ontario and Quebec.
Rob, how long will it take you to generate the report to send to me?
The report? I can forward that to you this afternoon.
Excellent. Okay. The reason I ask is I'll send it out with the YouTube and the AI generated minutes all at the same time, so everybody has it in one go. Any other questions or comments for Rob's report?
No, not for that. No, I don't have any. I have something else, but I'll let you finish the topic with Rob.
Anything else for Rob? Good, thank you. Okay, Irving.
I need to correct myself. I was just checking the House of Commons procedures, and in fact, there is no committee work that's possible during prorogation. So nothing is going to happen for at least a few months. I might suggest, perhaps, if you like, Miles, up to you. Maybe we skip February and come back in March, just in case there's something interesting to talk about.
Sure, I'm absolutely sure nothing's gonna happen, until March in the best case scenario. Okay, so, I will go see the Governor General. I will prorogue, our meeting, in this case, Governor General Irving,
Well,
we have his consent,
I
so.
think Sarah would like to chime in.
Hi, Sarah.
Thank you, Matthew. No, I just wanted to add that, I think skipping, so February sounds appropriate given the lack of activity, but I wanted to comment that as a newer member of the PRC, I do find I'm learning a lot. And even meeting just to talk about current events, like you were mentioning, Miles, I think is very helpful for me. So I just wanted to say that I would appreciate meeting, but I think, February sounds like there's not going to be a lot of current events to talk about.
Thanks, sir. That's nice to hear. Thank you very much. Okay, guys, anything else for the good of the meeting?
Motion to adjourn till March.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, everybody, enjoy your winter.
take care. Thank you, Miles.
Here, guys, we'll see
Bye,
you
everybody.
next month. All the best.
Thanks, Miles.